Professor publicly insults Karoline Leavitt, but her response shocks everyone. The conference room at Harvard University was a crucible of anticipation on February 24, 2025. Packed with over 200 attendees, seasoned journalists, distinguished academics, and eager students, the space thrummed with the low murmur of whispered conversations, punctuated by the occasional sharp click of camera shutters and the rustle of notepads. The event, a prestigious political panel hosted by the Kennedy School of Government, was designed to dissect the fractured landscape of American politics following a tumultuous election year marked by deep partisan divides and unprecedented public unrest. The panelists, a carefully curated mix of ideological heavyweights, included luminaries like Dr. Richard Callaway, a tenured political theorist in his late 60s with a silver mane and a reputation for razor-sharp intellect, and Karoline Leavitt, the 27-year-old prodigy of conservative media and newly appointed White House press secretary, whose meteoric rise had both captivated and polarized the nation. Dr. Callaway stood at the polished oak podium, his commanding presence amplified by the room's high ceilings and the warm glow of recessed lighting. His voice, resonant and authoritative, filled the space as he moderated the discussion, weaving through complex analyses of policy shifts and societal trends. Yet, beneath his scholarly veneer lay a notorious edge. Callaway was infamous for using his platform not merely to educate but to deliver scathing, often personal, critiques of political figures he deemed regressive, particularly those on the conservative right. Today, his sharp wit was primed for a target, and as he gestured dramatically with a fountain pen in hand, his piercing gray eyes landed on Karoline, seated at the far end of the long panel table. There she sat, her blonde hair styled in soft waves, wearing a tailored navy blazer that exuded professionalism, paired with a subtle gold cross necklace that caught the light with every slight movement. Her poise was striking, a quiet counterpoint to the frenetic energy of the room, but the murmurs among the audience suggested they were waiting, some with curiosity, others with a tinge of gleeful anticipation, to see how the outspoken professor would engage with her. Karoline's presence alone was enough to turn heads. Her rapid ascent from a small-town New Hampshire upbringing to a national stage had made her a lightning rod, admired by some as a beacon of traditional values and derided by others as a symbol of outdated ideology. Dr. Callaway's lips curled into a smirk, a familiar gesture that signaled the room to brace for impact. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's not every day we have someone with such a distinctive perspective gracing our panel. Perhaps you could enlighten us. What's it like building a career on, shall we say, alternative facts?" A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the room, some attendees chuckling nervously while others shifted uncomfortably in their plush leather chairs. The comment, laced with mockery, hung in the air, its intent clear: to undermine Karoline's credibility before the nation's intellectual elite. Karoline, seated calmly with her hands folded on the table, met his gaze without flinching. She had faced dismissive remarks before, on cable news panels, in scathing op-eds, even during hostile congressional hearings, but there was something particularly pointed about this public jab, delivered in front of an audience of elite intellectuals, media heavyweights, and students eager to witness a clash of titans. Her blue eyes remained steady, betraying no trace of anger or embarrassment, though internally, she felt the weight of the moment. She knew this was not just a personal attack but a broader challenge to the millions who shared her worldview, watching the live stream from across the country. Dr. Callaway pressed on, his tone growing more forceful, his words slicing through the room like a blade. "Let's be honest, the kind of rhetoric you champion, it's dangerous. The glorification of traditional values, the refusal to adapt to a rapidly changing world, it's not just regressive, it's outright harmful. And yet, you present it as some noble crusade." He scoffed, leaning forward slightly, his pen tapping the podium for emphasis. "Tell me, Karoline, do you actually believe the things you say, or is it all just a performance for the cameras?" A hush fell over the room, the kind of silence that feels heavy, electric with tension. The professor's attack was no longer veiled in sarcasm. It was a direct, calculated strike meant to humiliate, to expose what he saw as the fragility of her position. Some attendees averted their eyes, unsure of what to expect, while others leaned in, their smartphones raised to capture the moment, sensing that this exchange could redefine the panel's trajectory and ripple through the national discourse. Karoline took a deep breath, her expression unreadable but steady. Then, with a grace that belied her youth, she rose from her seat, the soft rustle of her blazer the only sound in the otherwise silent room. There was no hesitation in her movements, no trace of anger or embarrassment. If anything, she exuded a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space, drawing every eye toward her. "Dr. Callaway," she began, her voice clear and measured, carrying a calm authority that steadied the room. "I understand that you hold strong opinions, and I respect your right to express them. After all, that's what true intellectual discourse is about. Engaging with differing viewpoints, not silencing them. The professor raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical, but Karoline pressed on, undeterred, her words measured and deliberate. You see, I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire, in a working-class family where my parents, both factory workers, taught me that hard work, faith, and love for this country aren't just abstract ideals. They're the bedrock values that sustain communities, that give people hope in the face of economic hardship, cultural shifts, and political division. The people I advocate for aren't extremists, as you imply. They're everyday Americans. Teachers, nurses, small business owners, who believe in the Constitution, in personal responsibility, in the right to speak freely without fear of being ridiculed in a forum meant for serious discussion. A murmur rippled through the audience, some nodding in agreement, others watching with newfound respect. Karoline's words weren't defensive. They were deliberate, grounded in a personal narrative that resonated beyond the sterile confines of the panel. Her composure was striking, her delivery polished yet authentic, carrying the weight of someone who had lived the values she defended. She spoke not just for herself but for the millions who felt marginalized by the very institutions represented in this room, academia, media, and government. Dr. Callaway folded his arms, his smirk returning, though it seemed thinner now, as if her words had pricked his confidence. That's a compelling story, Ms. Leavitt, but rhetoric doesn't change facts. The world is moving forward, whether you like it or not, and your brand of politics belongs to a bygone era. He gestured broadly, as if encompassing the entire room in his argument, his voice rising with conviction. Progress isn't about clinging to outdated traditions. It's about embracing change, adapting to new realities, and dismantling systems that perpetuate inequality. Karoline smiled. A calm, almost knowing smile that seemed to disarm the room, her blue eyes locking onto his with unwavering resolve. The world moves forward because people challenge ideas, Dr. Callaway, not because they blindly accept being told what to think. That's why I'm here, not to be ridiculed, but to engage in real, substantive discussions. If you truly believe in progress, you wouldn't fear dissent, you'd welcome it. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the audience like a fog. A few attendees exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to something closer to awe. Even those who disagreed with Karoline couldn't deny the strength of her argument or the composure with which she delivered it. Dr. Callaway opened his mouth as if to retort, but for the first time in his illustrious career, he seemed momentarily at a loss for words. The tension in the room was palpable, a crackling energy that made even the journalists in the back row sit up straighter. The professor, accustomed to dominating such forums with his intellect and charisma, felt the ground beneath his authority shifting ever so slightly. The audience sensed it too. The smirks and quiet chuckles that had accompanied his earlier remarks had vanished, replaced by a hushed anticipation. Determined not to lose control, Dr. Callaway adjusted his stance, his smirk returning, though it lacked its earlier sharpness. Ms. Leavitt, I applaud your poise, he said, his tone laced with forced amusement. But let's not pretend this is about free speech. Your movement, your entire political ideology, thrives on misinformation and fear. You paint yourselves as victims when, in reality, you're the ones trying to control narratives. You claim to champion free thought, yet you align with those who suppress history, who rewrite facts to fit their agenda. He turned to the audience, his voice rising. Tell me, ladies and gentlemen, what happens when a society refuses to evolve, when it clings desperately to the past rather than embracing change? It crumbles. That's what happens, and that's why Ms. Leavitt's brand of politics is dangerous. It's built on regression, not progress. A few attendees nodded, reassured by the professor's familiar rhetoric, but others remained silent, their eyes darting between him and Karoline, waiting to see how she would respond. Karoline took a slow, deliberate breath, her expression unshaken. Dr. Callaway, she said, her voice steady and unwavering. You speak as though progress is measured solely by how far we distance ourselves from the past. But wisdom isn't found in abandoning history. It's found in learning from it. You accuse conservatives of clinging to outdated values, but tell me, when did principles like hard work, faith, and personal responsibility become obsolete? She paused, letting her words sink in, the room hanging on her every syllable, before continuing. You say my ideology is built on misinformation and fear, but isn't it fear that drives people to silence those they disagree with? Isn't it fear that leads someone to attack rather than engage? Her question hung in the air, heavy with implication, forcing the audience to confront the dynamic unfolding before them. Some attendees shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the so-called regressive figure in the room was not the one resorting to mockery. Dr. Callaway's smirk faltered, and he cleared his throat, attempting to regain his footing. Let's not get dramatic, Ms. Leavitt. No one is silencing you. You're free to speak, just as I'm free to challenge your ideas. That's the foundation of intellectual discourse. Karoline's smile didn't waver. Exactly. And yet, instead of challenging my ideas, you chose to mock me. Instead of debating, you ridiculed. That isn't intellectual discourse, Professor. It's intimidation. And the fact that you're standing here, trying to reframe this conversation, proves that you know it too. A collective murmur rippled through the audience, some exchanging glances while others watched in stunned silence. It was becoming clear that this exchange wasn't unfolding as Dr. Callaway had anticipated. His usual rhetorical arsenal, sarcasm, mockery, dismissive gestures, was failing him. Karoline wasn't flustered or defensive. She was calm, logical and, most troubling for him, making sense. Before he could respond, Dr. Callaway pressed on, his voice tightening with frustration. Oh please, let's not act like conservatives are the victims here. Your movement is built on exclusion, on rejecting those who think differently, on demonizing progress. You want freedom of speech, but only when it serves your narrative. He folded his arms, certain this would corner her, his confidence bolstered by the nods of a few sympathetic attendees. Karoline nodded slowly, as if she had anticipated this line of attack, her expression serene yet resolute. That's an interesting claim, she said, her tone measured. Because right now, I'm the only one being insulted in this room. I haven't called you names. I haven't mocked your beliefs. I've simply responded with reason, and yet you keep telling me I'm the one silencing others. Do you see the irony in that? Another silence fell, the weight of her words pressing down on the room, prompting a deeper introspection among the attendees. Some began to question the professor's approach, their initial amusement at his jabs giving way to a more critical examination of the power dynamics at play. Dr. Callaway clenched his jaw, his confidence visibly shaken. His usual tricks weren't working. Karoline wasn't reacting as he'd expected. She wasn't crumbling under pressure. She was standing firm, her arguments cutting through the noise with precision and clarity. Then, before he could respond, something unexpected happened, something that left the entire conference room stunned. The tension had reached a crescendo, the kind that made even the most seasoned journalists hold their breath. Dr. Callaway's expression shifted, a flicker of doubt crossing his face, his silver hair catching the light as he adjusted his glasses. He had expected Karoline to falter, to stammer through a weak defense or lash out emotionally. Instead, she had remained composed, her logic unassailable, her presence commanding. But Dr. Callaway wasn't ready to concede defeat. With a forced chuckle, he shook his head and turned back to the audience, adopting the same condescending tone he'd started with. You know, I have to give Ms. Leavitt credit. She's a skilled debater. You almost sound reasonable. Almost. But the issue, ladies and gentlemen, is that rhetoric is not the same as truth. He turned back to her, his smirk sharpening, his pen tapping the podium with a rhythmic impatience. Tell me, Karoline, your party, the people you so proudly represent, have they ever truly stood for everyone's rights, or do they only fight for the rights of those who look and think like them? Because last time I checked, the conservative movement has a long history of pushing policies that harm marginalized communities, limiting rights rather than expanding them. He paused, folding his arms, certain this would be the argument that finally put her on the defensive, his voice carrying the weight of decades of academic authority. A few attendees nodded, murmuring in agreement, bolstered by his invocation of a critique often leveled against conservatives, that they were inherently exclusionary and out of touch with modern societal needs. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she let the silence stretch for a moment, her gaze steady and resolute, her navy blazer a stark contrast to the professor's charcoal suit. You're asking me if conservatives believe in freedom for everyone, she said, her voice unwavering, carrying a quiet strength that seemed to echo through the room. Yes, Professor, we do. But the real question is, do you? A murmur ran through the room, catching Dr. Callaway off guard, his smirk faltering as he struggled to maintain his composure. Karoline continued, her voice growing stronger, infused with the passion of someone who had spent years defending her beliefs against far greater odds. Because here's what I've noticed. You talk about inclusion, but you ridicule anyone who thinks differently than you. You say conservatives are the ones limiting freedoms, yet here I am, a young conservative woman, being publicly insulted in a forum where ideas are supposed to be explored freely. And the second I push back, the second I refuse to bow my head, you tell me I'm the problem. She took a step closer to the podium, her confidence radiating, her gold cross necklace glinting as she moved, a symbol of the faith she so often cited as central to her worldview. That's not intellectual discourse, "Professor, it's indoctrination." And that's exactly why people are starting to push back. Not because they fear progress, but because they're tired of being told that their values, faith, family, hard work, personal responsibility, don't belong in the so-called modern world. A visible shift rippled through the room. Skeptical attendees leaned forward, their initial dismissals giving way to curiosity and introspection. Some whispered among themselves, others nodded thoughtfully, their preconceptions challenged by the clarity of her argument. Even those who disagreed with Karoline found themselves grappling with the questions she posed, their ideological certainties shaken by the force of her presence. Dr. Callaway opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come as easily as they once had. He glanced at the audience, realizing that the control he'd assumed was his had begun to slip. The laughter, the nods of approval that had once punctuated his remarks, they were gone, replaced by a tense, reflective silence. Karoline's voice softened, but her conviction remained unshakable, her tone carrying the weight of a lifetime of experiences condensed into this singular moment. "I came to this panel because I wanted to hear different perspectives," she said. "Because I believe in debate. I believe in questioning ideas, including my own. But I also believe that respect goes both ways. And if you truly stood for progress, Professor, you'd welcome different voices, not try to silence them." For the first time in his long career, Dr. Callaway had nothing to say. He stood there, his authority shaken, the room's energy irrevocably altered by the exchange. The silence was broken by something unexpected. Applause. It began with a few hesitant claps, then grew, some attendees clapping quietly, others more enthusiastically. Not everyone joined in, some remained silent, their faces etched with uncertainty, but the impact was undeniable. Dr. Callaway's face tightened, but he said nothing, turning back to his notes with a curt gesture. "Let's return to the panel discussion," he muttered, his voice lacking its earlier command, the authority he once wielded now diminished in the eyes of the room. As Karoline took her seat, she didn't gloat or smirk. She simply offered a quiet, knowing smile, her composure intact, her navy blazer and gold cross a quiet testament to the values she had defended. She hadn't needed to win an argument that day, she had done something far more profound. She had challenged the narrative, exposed the flaws in the professor's approach, and forced the room to confront uncomfortable truths about intellectual honesty, respect, and the boundaries of progress. For many in that conference room, the encounter was more than a clash of ideologies. It was a wake-up call, prompting some to reconsider their biases, others to reflect on the limits of their own tolerance, and still others to question the role of academia in shaping public discourse. As the panel continued, Dr. Callaway's authority felt diminished, his once unquestioned dominance overshadowed by the memory of Karoline's steady resolve. She had not raised her voice, resorted to insults, or succumbed to provocation. She had met condescension with clarity, transforming a moment of potential humiliation into a testament to intellectual courage. For the journalists scribbling notes, the students recording the event, and the academics in attendance, the exchange became a defining moment of the panel, a demonstration that true strength lies not in aggression, but in unwavering conviction. When Karoline walked out of the conference room, she didn't need to look back to know her words had left an indelible mark. She had entered as a polarizing figure, her conservative stance a subject of both admiration and derision, but she left as a symbol of resilience, proving that even in the face of public scrutiny, ridicule, and the weight of institutional power, one voice, grounded in reason and principle, could shift the conversation. The live stream of the event, already trending on social media, would amplify her message, sparking debates in living rooms, classrooms, and newsrooms across the nation. And that, she knew, was a legacy no amount of mockery could erase. A legacy of courage, clarity, and the enduring power of principled conviction in a divided world. The exchange between Karoline Leavitt and Dr. Callaway offers profound lessons for life, especially resonant for older adults seeking wisdom in a divided world. First, it underscores the power of composure under pressure. Standing firm in one's beliefs with grace, not anger, can inspire respect and change minds, a skill honed through years of experience. Second, it highlights the importance of respectful dialogue, even amidst disagreement, reminding us that true progress stems from listening and engaging, not silencing. For seniors, this reinforces the value of sharing hard-earned perspectives with younger generations, fostering understanding across divides. Third, Karoline's defense of timeless values, hard work, faith, and responsibility, offers a reminder to cherish and uphold the principles that have guided lives, even as society evolves. Finally, the story teaches resilience. Facing criticism with dignity, as Karoline did, builds a legacy of integrity. For older adults, these lessons encourage active participation in community discourse, ensuring their voices shape a future rooted in wisdom, respect, and enduring values.